welcome to Talking Absolute Worship. We've assembled some of the most creative worship minds that the Southwestern Synod has to offer. No barrel involved. Gerald, where are you thinking of going with these readings this week?
Well, these are fantastic readings to share, and I was drawn to the Psalm initially, Psalm 50, and a couple of things jumped out for me. The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth. This is spoken really from God's perspective. Some of the Psalms are laments, some of the Psalms are songs of praise, but this is a direct summons from God. And we're told that God comes and will not be silent. And so there appears to be a very, very clear message here that God is God and that we are called to listen very, very carefully, to be faithful, and to be responsive really to what God has to say to us. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we need experiences of the Transfiguration, because the Psalm leads very, very neatly into the passage from Mark, the Gospel, about the Transfiguration. In the Psalm, God says, I'm coming, but not in silence. This isn't business as usual. And then I think when we say these things, when the Psalm is read and we reflect on it, we've got to be a people that are ready to do something. We've got to be ready to move. And so when we reflect on mountaintop experiences, and but right behind me there is a beautiful painting. I'll just move to the side. You won't be able to see, it's very, very tiny in the background, but it's Table Mountain in Cape Town, a world famous place for those that have traveled down south to the southern tip of Africa. It's a beautiful experience to go to the top of the mountain, to view the surrounding coastline where the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans meet. A fantastic experience, but you have to come down. And for a lot of folk, that's a difficult thing to do. And I think both these texts will challenge us, will challenge our congregations to reflect on that, the need to have those mountaintop experiences. We don't want them not to have those, but we also want to balance it in recognizing that we can't stay up there. We have to come down to earth at some stage, but it's to be then use those experiences to motivate us in our discipleship and in our mission, as we want to be effective in our discipleship for God. So it's not just a divine fireworks display we're invited to, which is what some might want to do, but actually what we're going to do when we leave. We leave this time of worship. What are we going to actually do with this mountaintop experience?
Yeah, absolutely chime with that. Ruth?
Thank you for noticing the word listen in the Psalm. Because that was the word that struck me in the Mark too. This is my son, listen to him. And if we're still got the baptism of Jesus a little bit in our minds, it's slightly different, and it is directed at the disciples. I think your suggestion that we don't stop with this as what it says about Jesus, but what it says about us as disciples. I think that's there. You know, God says it, so that probably is true. We should listen and then we should act.
Yeah, I have got into the habit in some places, particularly places where I haven't been before, conducting worship, and I'm asked to do communion, of introducing them to, well, my interpretation anyway, which may or may not be correct, of what happens at the end of the Catholic Mass, when the priest, if he's doing it in Latin, so doing it properly, says "Ita missa est," and there's some disagreement about what that means, but I think a lot of people that I've read suggest that it could be paraphrased as "it is over, go out," or if you wanted to be blunter, "the mass is over, get out." And so I kind of got into the habit, firstly explaining that, and then at the end of communion, saying, "Get out." God doesn't want you lingering here in this worshipful experience. This is in order for you to get out, or in the Transfiguration language, go down to the valley. Neil.
Well, yeah, as you're saying that, it's nice. That kind of resonates with. I'm not the world's greatest expert on John Calvin, but I have read one or two bits and pieces, and I think one of the things that Calvin did in Geneva was have the churches locked after Sunday worship, precisely to make that point that really God is, the world is the theatre of God's glory, and we have amazing experiences in worship, but actually we then move on into the ordinary life of the world, and God is as much there as in the greatest mountaintop or worship experience.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I've read possibly slightly less live Calvin than you have, but yeah, that works. Lithan.
I was going to say that's really interesting, isn't it, to reflect on after a year of churches either being locked or suggesting we don't go, or only a few people go. I don't know where we'll be now. This thing of why is it that we want to climb back up the mountain? Or why actually do we think church is the place where we're going to find the mountaintop experience as well? Is that actually the place where it happens, or is it when we're outside?
Yeah, Gerald.
Yeah, I just echoing what you've been saying. The services that we have managed to hold during the lockdown period, we have been at pains to remind the congregation that the moment the benediction is said, that they must not linger. They must get out as quickly as possible. And in fact, not only get out as quickly as possible into the open air, but go home.
Yeah.
So I think it is a kind of encouragement to, let the service begin. Get out there and do what needs to be done, inspired by what you've experienced.
So the death of coffee and biscuits after the service will be a positive, lasting benefit of COVID in our church. Everybody runs out quickly after the service. Maybe that's where we're heading. Lithan, where are you going with these readings this week?
I'm just thinking that maybe instead of at the end of communion, it should be the end of coffee and biscuits. The urn is off, get out. Might work just as well. I haven't got a coherent, beautiful whole. There's lots of different things still buzzing around in my head over this. So just looking at Mark to start with, I think it's worth exploring what did it mean for Jesus to have Moses and Elijah appear with him? What was that saying? Was it so that they could have a chat? Because what did they talk about? How come the disciples didn't write? There's so many things, aren't there, that don't get written down. Why don't we know what they were saying? Were they going, jolly good, if I were you, I would have made that ending to the story? Or keep going, you're doing a brilliant job. Think about the things that we did. We don't know, do we? But what did it mean for Jesus to have them there in this very strange supernatural event? And because it's not at the beginning of his ministry, he's already been working. So maybe it is this sense of encouragement, because we're about halfway through Mark, aren't we? So that means we're coming to the end of the healing ministry and we're heading to Jerusalem. So it's maybe going, this has been great, so really good. God's well pleased with what you've done so far, but now it's time to reframe, rethink, because, you know, but God's with you. And the prophets, I mean, how awesome must that be? Kind of that sense of that cloud of witnesses really is behind Jesus in everything he's doing. So it's always a bit tricky to try and work out what Jesus is thinking, but maybe about why was this important for him? And then why is it important for Peter, James and John, who again sleep through half of it? As that's where I always feel like I'm one of them, that they suddenly go, oh, what's happening here then? And getting the wrong end of the stick and wanting to hold on to the moment. And what does it mean for us to think about trying to hold on to the moment? We've talked before about those mountaintop experiences that sometimes we want to try and hold on to. I know when sometimes I've been to, especially it seems to be nursery, because nurseries don't teach parents the etiquette of watching nativities quite as much, or maybe they forget every year. So nurseries where parents are not watching their children doing the thing, they are recording it and wanting to, they're jostling for position to get the best way to keep forever this thing of their children doing something amazing, rather than being in the moment with it. And it's so hard to remember to be in the moment, isn't it, when something fantastic happens? Last year we went away with Phil's mum for her 80th birthday, and we had all the family there, which logistically is very difficult because we live in different parts of the world and we don't have many photos. And sometimes I think, oh, isn't that a shame? And I think, no, because we just had a brilliant time and we don't need those things to tell us how brilliant that time of being together was. And then I also wonder what the transfiguration meant to the other nine who didn't get to go up and see it. How annoying must it be? It's always that. Why does he always choose them? Why is it those three who get to have these fabulous moments when they come down? Of course, they come down with a bump, as I think we might find next week. But that sense of what does it mean not to be part of that amazing thing, but still want to follow Jesus and love God with all your heart, mind and soul and strength. And maybe that's where there's something of the tricky Corinthians reading. The tricky bit for me is that sense that something is blinding people to see things properly, but we can proclaim God and have the light of Jesus shining out from us. And I think in a sense, Corinthians might be a little bit reassuring that it's not always easy to be able to shine the light, because it is veiled for some people, but yet that's still what we need to try and do. And there are some Christians where you can see that light shining out. And sometimes it's like for me, sometimes it's a bit harder to keep shining all the time. And that's where we need to think of those moments of feeling close to God, the mountaintop, to help us to keep shining through.
I think you can only see the light shining off my head because it's bald, and that's the real truth. Ruth.
I liked your use of the term reframing. That you know, this is yes, for Mark, it's at the kind of the pivot point of the gospel, but also where this is put in our Christian year. This is the last Sunday before Lent. So there's a little bit of reframing, as you called it, kind of regrouping. Okay, this is Jesus. This is what we're doing as we go into Lent. We need to hold that in our minds. And the lectionary does a similar thing with Advent, where we get Christ the King Sunday as the last one before Advent. So I think there is something about that reframing and regrouping and remembering who Jesus is before we go into this really quite tricky bit that's going to be taking us through Lent, and we know to the cross and we know to resurrection, but that they're going to be some down to earth with a bump was a good way of describing it.
Yeah, and I think that is a sort of a good watchword to look ahead to what's happening next. I think Ruth said something in one of our other recordings about the context, and context for what we are preaching. And it's one thing to say go down the valley, go down the valley to what? But I think I like your focus on this idea of capturing an experience. I think that's something that I played with a bit in my head when I was looking at this, and perhaps just maybe even slightly more than that, more than just recapturing it. I think it's wanting to have it again, and thinking that if you go back to the same place and create the same conditions, then God will be there. It's almost like controlling God, isn't it? This idea of building 3 booths. And so it means that now this is where God happens. So if we come at 10:30 on Sunday morning and we have 5 hymns and we have the right preacher, and then it will happen, and we've got God not trapped, but we control how we experience God. But this reading, I think, is telling us that we absolutely don't. There's no good going back up Mount Tabor or whichever mountain it was, because God's going to pop up somewhere else next week, and you'll miss it. And those 9 might be the ones who spot it this time, because the other 3 have gone back up to them booths that they built to try and get it again, but never quite recapture it. We do that in lots of bits of life. Don't we hear about couples who are having a rough time, so they revisit experiences and places where they were happy, or and it often just doesn't work to try and rehab an experience that was a moment. So yeah, I think I'd want to play with that some more, about how we subconsciously do that in our own worship. Create the conditions, God will show up. It's bound to happen. And if he doesn't, it's just because we need to change the music a bit, or wear the proper liturgical dress, or whatever it is that pokes God into making an appearance. As long as we just get the conditions right, God will show up. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a God of surprises. They weren't expecting this any more than Jesus was, I wouldn't imagine. They've been up mountains several times with Jesus. This never happened before. And it never happened again, from what we know. Neil, where are you going with these readings?
Well, there's so much. And so I think, like others, part of what I've been trying to do is just kind of work out what's a way through, not least, here's another Sunday where, in a sense, as soon as we get started, we kind of know the script a bit. Oh, okay, it's Transfiguration Sunday again, so here we go. And the bit that jumped out at me that I think is kind of leading me in some sort of direction actually is that opening line from Paul in 2 Corinthians. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. And that whole sense of something being veiled. And I guess it's leading me in the direction of thinking about the fact that the Transfiguration seems to be a moment where, in ways that are terrifying as well as reassuring, the veil is just simply, I mean, it's not just that the veil is pulled aside, it's that the veil is utterly overwhelmed, as it were, by the splendor and the glory and the wonder of the light and love of God kind of shining through and breaking into the world. And I guess inevitably that then made me start to think, well, so what might be some of the things that veil it again for us? Because what's interesting, I notice in Mark is as some of you have touched on already, is that there's also the sense of the secret still, that as they come down, Jesus says, you mustn't tell anyone about this until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So until you get to Easter, you have to hold on to this incredible experience, because in a sense, I wonder, maybe in a sense, it makes no sense until you get to Easter. And when you get to the empty tomb and you have the whole story, you can then understand why it makes sense to hear a voice and to see Jesus in conversation with Moses and Elijah and all the rest of it. And so it made me wonder about, in preaching it, what might it be to try and explore with a congregation in their context, both what are some of the veils, some of the things in our lives, in the life of the world, in the life of our community, that are veiling the good news, and being honest about the fact that I suspect quite a few of those things are internal to the life of the church, and they're internal to me. The times when I could have been a better witness, and I stepped back, and I didn't want to be a witness. Actually, I wanted to be anywhere else on earth but the place where God had put me, where I could have been a witness. But equally, the reassurance, I think, that comes from the fact that in the end, these three did tell the story, because otherwise we wouldn't have the story. And so I wondered if there might be an interesting, interplay in a sermon between the things that maybe are getting in the way, the things that veil the good news, and equally, because it would be awfully easy for that to just become a sermon that was about, oh, you're rubbish, we're rubbish, I'm rubbish, might as well just give up, because frankly, we don't get to be on the mountain of transfiguration. But equally, we do, because, in my life, in your lives, in the life of the church, in the life of the world, transfigurations are happening all the time. The veil is shifting, and the person who we found really difficult, not that any of you would have any of them, but I mean occasionally I've bumped into people like that, suddenly is the person who says something that reveals to you something of the heart of God, or whatever it might be. So I guess I was beginning to think of a sermon around that sort of theme.
That resonates with my reading. I don't think I'd picked up on the veil though, and I think that's really helpful. It reminded me of some wrestling I did a while ago about the message in the Psalms that comes across often about God hiding from us and how we deal with that. And I wrote a prayer at the time, which I haven't got to hand, but I often return to and use. It has language that goes something like, you do not hide from us, our selfishness blinds us, or our greed makes us deaf to your word, and phrases like that do try and pick out what some of those veils are. And I think that would be really fruitful. I mean, not that it's always us that prevents us from seeing God. God is mysterious. But I think that's really helpful reflection on where we might go with this. Ruth.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to Neil for that, and also for the balance of the yes, to think about the things which do get in the way, but also the things which are the way to experience God. And there's an interesting dynamic, isn't there, of not holding on to that or thinking we can create the right environment to meet God, but being aware, which takes us back to listen. As Gerald was saying from the Psalm, attend, be on the watch so that you don't spot it. And I'm reminded of the Celtic phrase of thin places. But maybe we want to talk about thin people or thin music, or the ways in which heaven and earth are suddenly very close, and it's spotting just those little glimpses where the veil sort of just in the breeze shifts aside and we see something. And I love the thought of thinking of the people who do that too, and not just the places.
Gerald.
I agree with that, Ruth. I think I was just thinking of folk in the congregation who are hesitant to go anywhere near a mountain. They just don't want to go there, and I don't know what it is. It's maybe they feel afraid of what might happen if they do, and seeing God in those moments, they feel somehow threatened. There is that veil, I guess, that they just can't seem to get through. So I suppose it's a process of teaching them to allow themselves the privilege, because it is, I think, a privilege to share in those precious, very precious moments. I came across you may have come across the story by H.G. Wells, who talked about this archbishop who struggled a little with his faith and asking God to meet his particular needs. He was always praying for others, but there was something that was really commanding his attention, and he needed help. So he went into the church and he prayed. And he had this awful sense of God's presence with him, and he asked for help, and then he heard this audible voice saying, "Yes, what is it?" And I'll read how it goes. How H.G. Wells ends off the story. He says, "They found his grace the next morning. He'd slipped off the chancel steps onto the crimson carpet. Clearly, his death had been instantaneous. Wells concluded that many people would die of fright if they ever heard a voice in the secret place of prayer saying to them, 'Yes, what is it?'"
Yeah, what a fantastic story. I'd never come across that. Yeah. Neil, before you drop dead.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, as you were both talking, it struck me too that, yeah, as I think several of you have already reflected on, there's also something really important about the surprise. And it made me just think of I think is it the C.S. Lewis phrase, "surprised by joy." That actually, you're absolutely right. The danger is we try to capture and somehow contain and control where God is going to do this and when and how and who with. And there's something really important in this text about the fact that, well, I mean, it goes into the two kings as well. Elisha didn't know what was coming, and nor did the three and perhaps nor did Jesus, but it still happened. And the surprising element is maybe another bit that is part of this.
Yeah, Gerald's story reminded me of something that preachers often wheel out, because it's one of those quotes that sort of goes around preacher circles. And I've yet to meet anyone who's ever read anything else by Annie Dillard, except for this paragraph. But Annie, people say it as if they've got all of her books on their shelf. They go, oh, of course, as Annie Dillard says, but it's always this same quote. Why do people in churches seem like cheerful, brainless tourists on a package tour of the absolute? On the whole, I do not find Christians outside the catacombs sufficiently sensible of conditions. Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we so blithely invoke? Or, as I suspect, does not one believe a word of it? Churches are like children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It's madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. A point being that we're going to worship not expecting any of this ever to happen, and if it did, well, like Gerald's story, we'd drop dead with shock if God ever did remove the veil for a moment in our morning Sunday worship. It's dramatic language, but I'm always struck by that. I must look up Annie Dillard. She must have written other stuff, but that one is often trotted out. Where are we up to? Ruth, where were you planning to go with these readings before everybody else provided such sparkling insight?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things about Mark have been said, and it's lovely. I got a bit hung up on Elijah and Elisha because I'd read the story before, you'd be glad to know, but there was that sense before, it's always felt a bit like an odd game of tag, with Elisha following Elijah around, and people keep saying, oh, he's going to go, and he's, oh no, don't talk about it, and he's following him everywhere. I have this image in my head of poor Elijah trying to go to the toilet, and Elisha's always there because he can't let go. So I think that's the kind of the bit, is this not letting go, and what he's told is by Elijah, if you see me go, then God will bless you, you'll get a portion of my spirit, all this sort of thing. And then it feels like, so even more he can't let him out of his sight, because he's got to see that moment. But what if, I kind of stood that on its head, what if the important thing isn't that he sees him, but that he lets him go, that he's got to let go. And that made me think about the resurrection appearances and of Jesus saying, do not hold on to me. And I thought there is something which again echoes with what we've just been saying about the transfiguration story from Mark, of trying to hold on to, trying to control, and that once Elisha does allow himself to see Elijah go, then yes, he is blessed. He's given the double portion of the Spirit, and the mantle literally comes onto him. He is the one who then continues with the message. So I think there was something there that I haven't quite got to the bottom of yet, about not wanting to control, but also that it's not don't touch at all, either from Jesus in the resurrection, that there is something about revelation. We are allowed to see and hear and touch and experience, but we also have to let go of that experience in order to work out how we are changed by that, how we are transfigured, and how we then go out into the world with the message that we've experienced. So I think that there's a lot of, I'm going to be doing a lot of this if I'm not careful when I'm preaching. There's a lot of balancing of it's okay to touch and experience. It's good, it's important, but then you mustn't try and kind of bottle it and grab hold of it and hold on to it so tightly that you're then missing the opportunity to let go and let God do the next thing, possibly using you. So I saw a definite resonance there, but I quite enjoyed digging into Elijah and Elisha a bit more.
Yeah, I'm not sure we get quite enough of Elisha and floating axe heads. And so I once went to a session where they picked out bits that weren't in the lectionary and challenged us to think about how we might preach about them. And one of them was the floating axe head. And we thought, where on earth do you go with that? And that is kind of what I thought about this this passage. And I think you've opened up a little bit of an opportunity there, Ruth. For us to think that through. It's something we talked about a little bit about with John the Baptist, talking about his successor, and he kind of tells his disciples to let go of him. He says, "Now, no longer following me, you're following him," and I reckon there probably is mileage in that. There's quite a lot of meat in these readings to get preaching teeth into, and we say this most weeks. It's not often a matter of what you say, it's what you don't say, and how you focus that in such a way that your community, your congregation, can grasp some of the truth of it for their own lives and for their own situations. I think we've heard some different approaches to that, which is helpful. Of course, there are all sorts of other ways that we could present these readings in the context of worship. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about how we might do that. Gerald, where are you up to with ideas about the rest of worship?
This is, I mean, this is really, really challenging. I was thinking about how I might, what do I want this story to accomplish in the life of the faith community? Do I risk sharing, modern day experiences of mountaintop experiences? Do I allow others? Is this a moment where others within the congregation have an opportunity to share some of their thoughts, which is something that doesn't often happen? I must admit that whenever we have an all-age type of service, at least around a table, it's a lot easier to look each other in the eye and be able to be honest and share with each other, rather than stand up in the front of the congregation and share your thoughts and your feelings. I know there's a risk in doing this. There is always a risk, because you will tend to get the same people who will say the same things, and you don't want that. But I think it's possibly a risk worth taking, because it's important to be able to express really your journey, or allow the congregation to express their journey with God, and to allow the possibility that others may be inspired by what they've experienced. So I think I would be prepared to take that risk at a time, either probably after the message, to lead into something like that, where there might be an opportunity to share.
I think that would be really powerful. I think I have often taken Transfiguration as an opportunity to frame it in a way that talks about, there's some stuff in life that we do that unless you were there, you can't put into words. So even when those 9 disciples who weren't there finally get the story out of the 3, they're just going to think, cloud, it makes. There are lots of experience in our lives that you just can't communicate with words, because you just had to be there. Those things are like that, and some of the milestones on our Christian journey are like that. Transfiguration moments are some things that happen to us that you can't put it into words that make sense to somebody else. And I've often introduced it like that, and quite often I will tell a story or two about the very few, to be fair, but real transfiguration moments that have been signposts or milestones in my own faith journey, because I think it does help to do that. And one of them, I'll try and tell it briefly because it's the end of a fairly long story. At the end of a very long story, very, very, very beginning of what I would call my conscious Christian choice to be a disciple, involved me after an encounter, which I might tell you about some other time, going back to my chalet at Butlins on my own on a drizzly night and lying on the bed to reflect on what on earth had just happened. And I was confused and I'm puzzled about what on earth had just happened. So there's a sense of mystery there for you. And what happened next was that I felt an utterly overwhelming sense of the movement of heat right through my body, starting at my feet and then working all the way through me. And it was unmistakable to me that there was a kind of one of those weird, inexplicable transfiguration moments that you can't put into words. And if you try to put it into words, people say, "Yeah, hot flush, Phil, hot flush," and it's lost. But I think sometimes in saying that, you can say, "Well, okay, so you've had moments like that. I know you have. All of you here have had moments like that." But maybe you're just too nervous to tell anyone else because they'll dismiss it as nothing. But you know it wasn't nothing. And here's an opportunity to tell it, to have a go, to tell someone, because you're in a room where people will respect that and people will understand that, and you can tell a part of your spiritual journey, and it will be very powerful. So I think you've persuaded me to do that again. I think that is really powerful. So thank you, Gerald. Yeah, Ruth.
Just as you were both talking, I thought it's how to get people to think about this, the mysterious or the numinous, and be prepared to say, well, it is a mystery, but we can try and talk about it. We can try and look at it. But it feels a bit like driving in the fog. That when you're driving in the fog, you want to see where you're going, and the temptation is to put your headlights on full to illuminate so you can see it. But of course, you know that when you do that, it's like then you're because what you do is illuminate the fog, and the light reflects back at you. And the more you try and illuminate it and penetrate it, the worse it is. And what you need to do is just keep peering and keep looking, and accept that you can't see as well as you want to be able to see, but you can't kind of force it. You've got to look and trust that you can see just enough and slow down. And so maybe there's something in sharing the stories of helping people to understand that we're not putting a searchlight on this because that will blind us. We're peering into the dark and unknown and the mist. And then maybe we do, because when you're driving in the fog, suddenly there might be a slightly lighter patch, the veil parts a little bit, and suddenly you can see. So it's kind of going with those sorts of, perhaps that sort of metaphor helps people understand what we're trying to do, and be let go of the critical, what is happening here, and ask them more, what is God showing us?
Yeah, that's a useful analogy, and I'm hoping that in a worship congregation in the URC, it is the sort of place where you can do that. Drop your critical faculties for a moment, or you're trying to explain the world, and just listen. That word again. Listen to what someone is telling you about what they have really experienced, and how it was to them, how it was a milestone on their Christian journey or something. Yeah. Nathan, where are you going with these?
Well, this is a bit of a stunt from the front, but do as you're able from the kitchen table, as it might be at the moment. But I think in thinking about this, because I think it's such a brilliant thing to do, has helped me think about something to reflect on. And I got this idea from Spill the Beans. And if you've never used Spill the Beans, it's a lectionary resource that comes out of Scotland that's just brilliant. So I refer to it a lot, but they pointed the way to this on the screen shows, which is how to make a cloud. There you go. You can make your own cloud. Who knew? And I'm sure you can use that for all sorts of things. But I actually thought about then the fact that by the time the cloud comes, the disciples are already really scared. So for that, that's a lovely, soft, gentle little cloud. But for them, the cloud, they were already frightened. Then this cloud comes and it's still really bad. But it's in the cloud that they hear God's voice. And it's interesting that in Corinthians, kind of cloud or veil is bad and sunshine and light is good. But actually in this story, it's in the midst of the cloud that they hear God's voice, not in the sunshine. In the sunshine, something strange and terrifying happens, but it's in the cloud which overshadows everything, in the mist and the fog. That's where God is. So it is still a bit of a stunt, but I like it, and I like the way that you could then maybe talk about clouds and God's voice. Oh, and the other thing, sorry, Phil, before you comment, the other thing is that as this is the end of Epiphany, it could be a time to look back on the stories. There's always a danger in doing a quiz at church. So I once did, at the end of a sermon series on the minor prophets, did a little quiz. Nobody could remember a thing. So there is always that danger. However, the stories we've had in Epiphany are more well known than the minor prophets. So you might be in luck with finding out what things were revealed about Jesus, and have any new things been revealed about Jesus. Have you had some aha moments through the time of Epiphany? And sometimes, as well as mountaintop, talking about aha moments helps people to understand that what they've had is something that goes, oh, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, Phil's is an amazing physical thing that happens, but it might just be a moment of going, well, that you, or when the hairs go up on your body, it doesn't have to be and now my life was changed, but that actually God, that some of them are, but some of them are quite small, but they're all significant aha moments of revelation of God's love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth stressing that actually most of them are not necessarily the only or key turning point either. They're staging posts, or because there's more, and you need an accumulation of these things and stuff that happens in your life that leads to a life of discipleship, and that carries on hopefully throughout your whole life. It's not a kind of bang, there it happened, like St. Paul, for most people. Yeah, I like that, and the fog and the fog and the cloud, I think are excellent metaphors. I think I don't know. I'll show you a picture, because I didn't know what Mount Tabor looked like. Have I got a picture of it here somewhere? Possibly, maybe. Yeah, it's going to be on here. Yeah. I wanted that slide. How do I get back to that slide? I've broken the internet. Right, I'm going to have to turn that off and go back to it manually. bear with me, because I was quite startled by. I can't get it on. I'll show you later on. But Mount Tabor sort of comes out of nowhere as a kind of like a pudding bowl, isn't it? And there's no there's no surprise that it gets covered in cloud, because it just sticks up like something weird in the middle of nowhere. I've been walking on Dartmoor just because of where I live, and most times on Dartmoor, you have to be a little bit careful about knowing where you're going and having your map and having your compass and stuff and knowing how to use them, which I can vaguely do. I can do it enough to find the car again, usually. But the reason is because you can be walking on Dartmoor and you can see where you are, and you can see different tours, and you can see a river. And so you always kind of know, if I follow that river, I'm back down where, I want to go in that general direction. And you can map out a route between the tours, and you know where you are basically just by looking. But fog and cloud on Dartmoor come down in an absolute instant. And when it does, all of those things completely disappear. And within minutes, you are not walking in the direction you think you are. And I'm wondering whether you saying it was in the cloud that they had that reassurance and that connection. Maybe it's only when we lose all of our landmarks that we learn to trust. And all of the things in our lives that we learn to lean on first, that we can properly experience what it means to lean on the glory of God. When we can't see any of this, and Mount Tabor is like that. You can see for miles off Mount Tabor. You can see everything. It's one of the reasons why people go up there, for the splendid views of the valley and everything else. You can see everything. But when that cloud came down, suddenly it was all taken away completely. And I'm wondering whether that's why in the cloud they had that moment of wow, connection to who God is in their lives. Maybe not quite so much in the fog when you're driving. All the familiar landmarks are gone, and it's a scary experience, isn't it? So, Neil, where are you going creatively with worship this week? At this point, something went badly wrong with Zoom's recording feature, and I got cut off, and Ruth got cut off, and Neil got cut off. So the following is a reconstruction of what happened next.
I think a couple of things that I found for the use with the Transfiguration, things that might give us slightly different dimensions to worship. If I just share my screen. So first of all, there's this, and this is an icon of the Transfiguration from the Orthodox tradition, which you can find if you just put in a search to Google, although make sure that when you put in the search terms, you say you want Creative Commons copyright. So those are the sort of images that you can use for public worship. And there are a number of these, but what I love about the icons is a couple of things. I think one is down the bottom, you have the disciples almost literally being sort of blown backwards by the sheer kind of power of what is happening at the Transfiguration as heaven and earth kind of meet and collide, and a path is opened between heaven and earth with Jesus in its midst. So I love how often these icons will have that, but also the sense of how you're kind of seeing almost through and behind Jesus as the divine, as heaven kind of comes forward into our world, which I think is a powerful way of kind of describing and summing up what goes on at the Transfiguration. So that's one thing that might be shared. And here's another. This is Hillsongs, and this is their song Transfiguration, and it comes with the lyrics. But this is something that could, I think, easily be played.
From the cloud you speak, what was fair
again, very easy to find if you just search for it on YouTube. So a couple of things there that I think could be used to help frame and add to a Sunday service that was reflecting on the story of the Transfiguration.
So for Transfiguration, I'd like us to look at some work by Malcolm Guite, a sonnet that he's written called Transfiguration. But first of all, I wanted to share a picture. So here it is. It's by a Cambridge artist called Rebecca Merry. And I just love the fact that the disciples, as ever, have sort of fallen away from the figure of Christ. But when you look at the figure really closely, you see the marks of crucifixion already on the transfigured Christ. So there's something here about a timelessness, that this is an opening into a different time, that it stands outside of time. And Rebecca Merry's work was inspired by this sonnet by Malcolm Guite. For that one moment, in and out of time, on that one mountain where all moments meet, the daily veil that covers the sublime in darkling glass fell dazzled at his feet. There were no angels full of eyes and wings, just living glory full of truth and grace. The love that dances at the heart of things shone out upon us from a human face. And to that light, the light in us leapt up. We felt it quicken somewhere deep within. A sudden blaze of long extinguished hope trembled and tingled through the tender skin. Nor can this blackened sky, this darkened scar, eclipse that glimpse of how things really are. And I think I've decided for Transfiguration, instead of any sermon from me, I might just read Malcolm Guite's poem and show people Rebecca Merry's art. It says it better than I could. In all our preaching and leading of worship, to shine through us, for your love to be known, for people to see the veil lifted, that in what we attempt to do, we will allow your glory to be known. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.